Hey YouTube, this is Eugene back with another dashboard review, this time of the Liong Mah design Endeavour. Here's a look at the show side of the knife. And here is the spine of the knife. Here's the lock side of the knife. And here is your lockup. The Liong Mah design Endeavour. Let me go ahead and say this right off the bat, I just absolutely adore this knife. I love this knife. I love this knife design. This knife is probably in my top 5 favorite knives in my entire collection. And I don't really foresee that changing anytime soon, or maybe even for the duration of my time on this earth collecting knives, which I hope is a long time. But yeah, this is just one of my favorite knives in my collection, and I'm kicking myself for not having jumped onto it earlier. When it first came out, I think it was around the beginning of 2017 when it hit the market. During that time, I was a lot more interested in the Rayot knives future, which you can probably see here in the background. But yeah, I was a lot more interested in that knife and really wanted to get my hands on one of those. And since these two were around the same price, I just kind of overlooked this one. I overlooked the Endeavour in favor of the future. And yeah, I don't regret that because I love both knives, but yeah, I guess I ended up passing up a knife that really ended up being, in some ways, a more usable, a more pocket-friendly, a more enjoyable knife for me all around. This knife, it doesn't have as much flash, although I think it does have flash. It doesn't have as much flash as the Future did, but in a lot of ways, that actually makes this a better knife for me. And so yeah, when I got this knife, I ended up kicking myself mentally and emotionally just because I was thinking, man, what was I doing living life without this knife? I know how dramatic that sounds, and I can tend to be dramatic, just ask my wife. But yeah, that's really honestly how I felt. And in fact, it was with my wife that I actually first got a chance to handle one of these and decide to buy one. We were on a date in San Francisco, and there's a nice little knife shop up there on Pier 39 called Weeby Knives, and I'm not affiliated with them, so don't worry, I'm not getting any kickbacks from them or anything like that. But yeah, they had one of these in stock. They had a couple of these in stock actually, and you know, again, I had seen pictures of this knife and just kind of thought like, oh yeah, that's a pretty interesting knife, but whatever, and just kind of moved on from it. But since they had them in stock, I decided, you know, I should give it a try. I should at least handle one before I continue in this path of dismissing this knife. And so the guy behind the counter brought it down from the stand, and I got to handle one. And as soon as I got it in hand, I realized, wow, this is in a lot of ways my perfect knife. And so I ended up walking out of the store with one. I didn't walk out of the store with this one, the one that you see in this video right now, but I did walk out of the store with an Endeavour, and we'll get back to that in a little bit. The Endeavour is a fantastic knife design. It's designed by Liong Mah. You can see his maker's mark right there. Liong Mah, who's out in Florida these days, I believe. And like a lot of Liong Mah's recent designs, this was produced by Rayot Knives out in China. I have another one of Liong Mah's designs that was produced by Rayot Knives right here. This is the Lanny. Fantastic, smaller knife, although not smaller in every dimension. You can probably tell from the blade stock right here. But yeah, this is another example of Rayot Knives produced Liong Mah, and yeah, these two knives have really turned me on to Liong Mah designs and just furthered my my confidence in Rayot Knives as a top-of-the-line knife producer. I see on the internet comments like, oh, you know, like Rayot is overpriced and they can't compete with zero tolerance and stuff like that for value. And you know, honestly, I just don't agree. I just don't believe that. I think that they're just some of the best production knives being made right there. I mean, right now on the market. But anyway, yeah, this is another fantastically executed Rayot knife produced Liong Mah design. Let's talk about the actual specifics of this design part by part, as we usually do. So let's start with the blade here. So the blade here is a pretty traditional looking silhouette, even though it's got a lot of non-traditional details. It's got a pretty traditional looking silhouette, a simple drop point with a lot of belly and a decent amount of flat with some nice precision at the tip. Just a very typical, classic blade shape, one that is suitable for a lot of different applications. The only application that this might look like it's good for, but actually it isn't very good for, is food prep, and that's because of how thick the blade stock is on this. This is a very, very thick blade here, and they start that flat grind decently high, but not quite high enough to get it to the thinness that I would like for slicing an apple or something like that. So yeah, I've tried to use this for some food prep. I don't do a whole lot of food prep with my pocket knives, but I just wanted to try it out and test it. And yeah, I wouldn't really recommend this for doing really delicate tasks. But for everything else, in terms of your everyday carry needs, this knife blade shape would really excel, I think. Speaking of that grind though, I just love the way that Rayot does their satin grinds. I know it looks pretty rough, but I'm kind of into that. I'm into rough satin grinds, and I think it looks gorgeous. You've got that vertical grind there, and then you've got this horizontal grind. I believe that is a hand rub. I could be wrong, but I believe that is a hand rub going horizontally across the blade. I like that contrast. I think it looks really nice. As you can see here, this is S35VN, a great blade steel that, yeah, maybe at this price point you're expecting something a little bit more premium, but I personally really like S35VN because it has a nice balance between hardenability, toughness, and sharpenability. So I'm glad that they went with S35VN in this. I wouldn't have complained at M390, but seems like Liong Mah typically likes S35VN anyway. If you look underneath these logos here and the branding here, or the stamping here, you'll see that there's a kind of a finger choil here. It doesn't come out as a completely, you know, as a semicircle. It's just kind of more like an arc where you can rest your finger, but it functions well as a finger choil, and that's really helped by the fact that this jimping comes out as far as it does on the top of the blade, on the spine of the blade, and so your thumb rests naturally right up here when you come up and use this as a choil. The only thing you want to be careful of is that there isn't really a guard for your index finger there, so you could slide onto the sharpened part of the blade pretty easily. Speaking of that sharpened part of the blade, there is no real sharpening choil. Even though that finger choil is there, it doesn't kind of come back down deep enough to become a really effective sharpening choil, so just keep that in mind. This is a knife that I tend on stropping a lot more than sharpening, because that's just typically how I maintain my knives anyway. But yeah, so there's that. Going back to that jimping, I like how Liong Mah tends to do this kind of sawtooth jimping style where the jimping is angled backwards and kind of digs into your thumb. You see that also on this Lanny here. It digs in, but it's not unpleasant. It's not sharp. It's just really effective. I like that. So I think he's found a good way of making jimping not too sharp, but still really effective, just by tilting the point of the jimping back a little bit. I like that. Another thing I like, let's get now to some other details of this. Take a look at that orange peeling. Isn't that gorgeous? Oh shoot, there we go. Yeah, isn't that gorgeous? So he cut out this channel and then cut out this hole. I'm not exactly sure what this hole is for. I don't think it was necessary in terms of functionality. It's not like a insane nail nick either. You know, it's just a hole in the blade. I think it looks really cool. I think it gives a nice depth to the design, but I kind of wonder if maybe that was just something he threw in for aesthetic reasons. I don't think it has any functional purpose, because that groove with the orange peeling especially already functions well as a alternative way of opening the blade, right? The orange peeling really grabs onto your thumb in a nice and pleasant way, and allows you to do a slow roll like this, or do a spidey flick from the other side. I just really like that additional functionality, and I like that feel of the orange peeling underneath my fingertip. I think that's just gorgeous. I believe the way they do that is with like a wire wheel. They kind of take a wire wheel brush and work through that, and it kind of slightly melts the surface of the steel and pulls it at the same time, and it creates this weird ripply kind of look. I could be wrong on that. I did a little bit of research. That's what I came up with. But if you know more about it, then please feel free to comment below in the comment section. But yeah, I just really think that that's a fantastic detail, and I love how that's carried out to the pivot collar too. So this is not like a custom pivot screw head. This is just a pivot collar on either side. Just a regular torque screw. But yeah, isn't that nice? Isn't that a nice touch? This knife actually came in three three versions. You have this bronze handled version. There's a stone-washed gray titanium one, and then there's one called the bling version where the entire handle is just orange peeled just like that. And man, I want to see one of those in person. I feel like it would just look so sick, so cool. Maybe a little too flashy for some, certainly a little too flashy for me, to be honest, but I just still want to see one. It just looks so good to my eye. This knife, the tang of the blade, it rides on a ball bearing pivot. That is extremely smooth. You got ceramic bearings and a ceramic detent working there. This is one of the smoothest knives that I have, and it pretty much just drops shut. Riyadh knives are not known for having kind of a super fast guillotine action, but it is really remarkably smooth. I just really love it, and especially with a little bit of nano oil in the pivot and on the detent ball, and this thing just flies open. Speaking of flying open, take a look at that flipper tab. This is about as low profile as you can go without relocating the pivot tab, the flipper tab, sorry, somewhere around here, around this corner or something like that. I've got a knife coming in that does that, or actually I have a knife that already does that right now, right? You see how that flipper tab is aimed up and kind of, instead of coming out this way, it comes up this way. Yeah, this is about as low profile of a flipper tab as you can get while still coming out to the side like this. It is actually very functional. He hasn't sacrificed a lot of function for this. It does favor, I guess, a push button. Or I'm sorry, not a push button, a light switch. You can't really push button this because of how high up it's positioned. Yeah, it works really well on the light switch, and that jimping there's some jimping on the flipper tab that really aids in that. To be honest though, I have had instances where my hands were wet or my finger was particularly oily or something like that, and due to the slope it just kind of slipped off like this, but that doesn't really happen very often, maybe once in every 100 flips or something like that if I'm not paying attention. But yeah, there you go. I like how the surface of the flipper tab just kind of lines up nicely with the corner that's cut out of the handle here. And that brings me to one of my favorite aspects of the design on this, just the lines on this. This is an extremely clean knife. It's a very clean lined knife, if that makes sense. It's very clean in its lines without being boring. You know, there's some knives that are very clean and straightforward and simple, but sometimes can get a little bit visually boring. Like, I guess I'm imagining a plain Jane Sebenza. No offense to Sebenza, you know on this channel that I love my Sebenza, and I love Chris Reeve knives in general, but that to me is an example of a knife that gets all the lines right, but in kind of a boring way, in a way that is a good boring, not a bad boring, but it's just kind of visually boring. But this knife gets a lot of clean lines into its design without being boring. At least I don't think it's boring anymore, right? You've got this nice curve that comes up to give you a bit of a swell in the handle, to fit the curvature of your palm nicely. The bottom line here, it starts with this deep finger guard here that just kind of turns into a straight parallel line all the way towards the end. So it gives you plenty of neutrality while also giving you some protection against sliding forward when using the knife. The neutrality actually benefits this knife in that you can use it in almost any grip, even a pull grip, which I find that most knives don't really do that well at. This knife excels in every grip imaginable. And going back to that, I guess the reverse or hammer grip or something, I don't know exactly what you'd call it, but at the end, at the butt of this handle, you've got a little bit of jimping here and a nice angle cut into it so your thumb can rest just very naturally and comfortably right there. It's just fantastic. Well thought through and yet extremely simple. Sometimes, you know, when you're trying to accommodate a lot of things, you can overcomplicate a design. But Liong Mah really sidestepped that. He simplified the design and still ended up being able to accommodate a lot of different grips and styles and hand sizes and so on and so forth. Let's see here. What else do we want to say about this handle before we get to the big thing about this handle? Well, let's go through the lock side. You've got a nice milled titanium pocket clip here with a ball that's been milled into the pocket clip, as opposed to an additional Todd Begg style ball bearing or something like that here. I think that that's just really good thinking on their part, and it's very, very functional. This is a very functional milled pocket clip, even though, you know, it actually does look a little bit thick, doesn't it? This part, the shaft of it, or the shank, I don't know what you would call that. I guess the shank of the pocket clip looks like it'd be a bit thick, but I guess because they've 3D milled it, there's not that much material, and so bending this clip is not hard to do, but it gives you good retention once it's in pocket. They've kept the simplicity and the cleanness of the lines going with the relief cut here. You don't have kind of this scoops cut out or a bunch of like lines there. It's just one nice pocket that's milled out and contoured very nicely. Everything on this is contoured, as you can see. Every edge. No, there's not a single sharp edge on this handle. You've got your integrated over travel stop and your steel lock bar insert right there, just as you'd expect at a knife of this price point, and actually even significantly cheaper knives. But yeah, disengaging the lock is very comfortable, very soft, even though there isn't a huge amount of access to that lock bar. Like, you don't have a scoop cut out of the show side of the handle to give you access to the lock bar, but you do have these pockets milled out that gives your thumb enough space to get in there and disengage the lock. And the lock bar tension isn't crazy high, and so it gives you just enough to be able to disengage this pretty comfortably. Let's talk about the handle as like the big thing about the handle. Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing before we get to that. Take a look at the hardware on this. They've also been orange peeled. I forgot to mention that earlier. You don't, of course, see it on this side, but on this side you do. You've got the orange peeled heads of the screws there to match the pivot collar and this groove in the blade. It's just great attention to detail. It's gorgeous, in my opinion. But yeah, let's talk about the big thing about this handle, and that is that when Liong Mah set out to design this, he set out to do something like a virtual or pseudo integral design. This isn't like the first time this has ever been done, but I feel like Liong Mah was particularly trying to make this look as integral as possible. And so it's not inconceivable that Reate could have made this knife handle as an integral because of how simple and simple and uncomplicated it really is. You've got this integrated back spacer that really comes out from either slab, meeting together in this perfect line there, and this nice grooving, this nice milling here. As you can see, it just looks really clean, and if you're looking at it from far away, if you're not really focusing or paying attention, you would probably mistake this for an integral, and it certainly feels like an integral. It has a lot of that nice solidity and strength to it. There's something just a little bit different about an integral that this knife manages, actually, generally speaking, to capture. So I really like that. But that gets me to talking about what happened to the original knife, a copy of this knife that I had bought at the knife store in San Francisco. The one that I had, for whatever reason, I noticed that the channels that are cut across here, the grooves that are cut across here at the butt of the handle, they weren't completely cut across. Like in the seam here, there was some extra material that kind of formed a line straight down the middle here. I don't know how else to describe it, but that's what I saw, and so it looked like the channel had been cut, but then not cut all the way through the stock. And so I took some pictures of it and I emailed Liong Mah just on the off chance that he might be able to help me out. And man, did he help me out. He actually told me that he had never seen that before on one of his endeavors that Reate produced for him, and so he told me to send it in to him. So I mailed it out to him, and a week later I had another knife. He just completely swapped it out for a completely new knife that didn't have any of the issues. I mean, that's just amazing customer service. Liong Mah is an amazing guy and just such a wonderful person to work with, and so from that moment I decided, yeah, I want to support this guy. I want to support this guy with my money. I want to support this guy as a fan of his designs and just of his approach to the knife industry and all that he's contributed to it. So I was so close to buying one of his X5 integrals, especially since you can see kind of some echoes of the X5 here. I don't know if you can tell, but the contouring on the handle, it kind of scoops in, so you've got these scallops scalloped spine going on there. I think that's actually not a call back because this knife came out first, but kind of a call forward to the X5's radical sculpting and scalloping of the handle to fit the hand better. Man, I really want to get an X5 someday. but yeah, I just really love him as a knife designer, and he's such a great guy to work with. But yeah, this is kind of an overview of this knife. Let me do some comparisons. When I got the Future, and then I got the Endeavour, when the Endeavour came out and I saw pictures of it, I mean, you can kind of see a resemblance between these knives, right? I mean, I can. The blade shape and the blade profile looks pretty similar to me, even though the Endeavour is more of a drop point, and the Future just kind of has a very straight spine line, I guess you could call it. The cutting edges of these two knives are pretty similar. The lack of a sharpening choil is pretty similar. The landing point forward landing point for an index finger is pretty similar. You don't have jimping here, but you have this integral on the right, and then this pseudo integral on the left with some interesting work on the back. Yeah, to me, these two knives are just very similar. Even the bottom line of the handles are almost identical. You've got that deep finger choil leading into a straight line all the way back. Even the spine of the handle, you know, this is looks like a more smooth out version of it, but you've got this similar kind of hump going in to fill up the hand recesses a little bit better. So when I look at these two knives, I feel like they bear a very, very strong resemblance. And so when I got the Endeavour in hand, I realized that this is the Future that I can carry every day with myself. Yeah, I know I could and I should carry the Future a lot more, but just a lot of the different things going on this knife make me want to kind of baby it a little bit. The marbled carbon fiber, or the shredded carbon fiber, just the unique pattern of anodization and stonewashing and all that. I just want to kind of baby it a little bit more, but I don't feel that inhibition with the Endeavour. And true to its name, like I feel like I want to go out and use this. I want to go out and try to do something with it. And so, yeah, when I got this, it kind of made me feel like, man, finally I have a knife that reminds me of the Future. Of course, it has its own identity as a design, but it kind of reminds me of one of my favorite knives. But I can carry it every day and not feel bad about that. I don't know why that kind of a psychological switch happened, but it did happen that way for me. This is just such a gorgeous knife. But let's say that you're on the look for a knife kind of like this, with kind of a generally similar design philosophy, but you don't want to spend as much. You want to spend a couple $100 less than this one costs. Well, in that case, I might recommend the Slipstream to you. We're starting to get pretty different, but the Slipstream by We Knives really bears a lot of similarities to the Endeavour, in my opinion. You've got a fairly similar blade shape, a lot of the same kind of functionality, flipper tab plus spidey flickable and thumb openable blade groove. You've got a very comfortable handle that also has some very clean lines going with it. You've got a forward finger choil that you can use, especially if you're being careful. But yeah, this is a great alternative to this knife. It has a little. This knife can be the Slipstream can be purchased in a more toned down version than this kind of blingy version that I have. But yeah, I would say that would be a great alternative, especially considering how smooth the Slipstream is. This is maybe one of the smoothest knives in my collection, period, hands down. You got to watch out that it doesn't lop off your finger as it's closing. Whenever you're in this price range, though, of course, you always have to consider a couple of other mid-techs and a couple of other high-end production knives, too. Of course, you got to consider, right, the Alamik Tactical Swish. These two knives are very different from one another from a design standpoint and a functionality standpoint. Everything about these knives really is a little bit different from the other one, but I really think that it makes a good argument for the same amount of money. If you're spending $400 or more on a knife, then you really should be thinking about the Alamik Tactical Swish. Now, I know that these seem to start a little bit higher, closer to the 500. But yeah, they're backed by a fantastic company that has a fantastic warranty and all that. So yeah, this would be a great option. Also, an incredibly smooth knife that isn't quite drop shuttable, but again, that's not an end all be all. That's just a design philosophy kind of thing. And of course, you have to consider when you're spending this much money, you got to consider, of course, a Chris Reeve. This is not a flipper. It's not meant to compete with flippers. That's not really the design philosophy. It looks like I got a little bit more oil on this pivot than I intended to. But yeah, this is a knife that you should consider as well, just because it's so good. And yeah, I just don't know what else to say. At around $400, this just represents such a fantastic value for its warranty, for its build quality, for everything about it that is so precise and well executed. Yeah, I would recommend looking into one of these. But in the end, if I had to choose between all of these knives and this one, oh boy. If the proposition was 5 knives for this one, then of course I'd take the 5. But I think this knife could really go toe-to-toe with any one of the knives that you see on my dashboard right now. It could definitely go toe-to-toe with any knife that I've reviewed so far. And so, yeah, stay tuned to see if maybe there's a knife that this knife won't be able to go toe-to-toe with. But again, I don't suspect that will be the case in the near future. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this review. Have a good one. Bye.